Okay, before we get into anything, I gotta admit something. Yes, I ranked Allen Robinson over Cooper Kupp last season. There, I said it. But we are going to be diving in to some wide receivers that failed miserably last year. And we are going to see if they can bounce back, if we think that they have better situations this upcoming season, and if we should be targeting them in fantasy football drafts. And I know people are going to say, Mason, are you an idiot? It's June. Why are we talking fantasy? Have you not been looking at our channel? We are getting in real money fantasy football drafts every single day on Underdog Fantasy. You can do the same with the link in the description of the video or in the comment section. But when you go over to Underdog Fantasy, you'll be able to get into drafts with us on the live stream, get into drafts in a public lobby, get into drafts against your whatever you want to do. If you enjoy fantasy football, you'll have a ton of fun doing so. And also, if you're a first-time depositor and you use promo code FLOCK, they will match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You will get our 2022 rankings. You will get my dynasty rankings. You'll get my dynasty rookie rankings. You'll get our dynasty rookie draft guide, literally with the $10 deposit. All that stuff, we sell it for like $50, so you can get it for 10 with that deposit. But that should be it. Let's go through and let's dive into some of these wide receivers. And instead of starting off with the poster boy for this video in Allen Robinson, we'll keep him until the end. Let's go Brandon Aiyuk first. Aiyuk's not going to be a wide receiver that too many people think about whenever they're hearing, bounce back candidate. But I think it's just people have forgotten how good Brandon Aiyuk was his rookie season. His rookie season in 2020. Keep in mind, this is an offense that had Deebo Samuel. He was drafted in 2019. That had George Kittle. He was drafted in 2017. Yet Brandon Aiyuk as a rookie came out and was the wide receiver 17 on a per game basis. Just to give you some context of how impressive he was his rookie year, he went out there and he averaged 8 targets a game. He had almost 22.5% of his team's target share, and he was scoring touchdowns. He had almost half a touchdown a game in this 49ers offense because we know San Francisco is going to be very efficient based on how their run game is set up. And there are a couple different things working in favor on why you should potentially draft Brandon Aiyuk despite the horrible second year where he was the wide receiver 57 on a per game basis. We need to acknowledge the fact that Deebo Samuel and George Kittle are both pretty big injury risk. Now, yes, as of now, both Deebo Samuel and George Kittle are healthy. But if we look at their injury history, oh my gosh, it is a laundry list of, foot sprains, hamstring strain, like any injury you can think of, these guys have suffered. They've missed a combined 25 games through their respective careers in San Francisco. And we've already seen, hell, if Deebo Samuel, if George Kittle were to miss time, Brandon Aiyuk has upside to jump into possibly being a top 24 wide receiver yet again. We have 9 games with Brandon Aiyuk and no George Kittle in this offense. And Brandon Aiyuk went from being a wide receiver that with George Kittle averages 5.8 targets a game to with no George Kittle, almost 8.5. The fantasy points per game gets an uptick up to 14. And we see a very similar thing happen when Deebo Samuel misses time. Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel have played a combined 21 games together. And in those 21 games, Brandon Aiyuk averages about 6 targets a game. But if Deebo Samuel were to miss, then all of a sudden Brandon Aiyuk is jumping up to 8 targets a game. So just this one thing, while yes, it looks bad on the surface for Aiyuk. He is the wide receiver 3 on a run first offense where we don't know if his quarterback's going to be any good at getting him the ball. But that's baked into his price. Drafters know that. They know he's behind George Kittle and Deebo Samuel on the target totem pole. This is why he's being drafted as the wide receiver 39 right now on Underdog Fantasy. He's being drafted directly ahead of Sky Moore and Hunter Renfrow. You're getting a wide receiver that his rookie season was the wide receiver 17. You're getting that at wide receiver 39 with Brandon Aiyuk not even stepping into the prime of his career yet. We should assume he is still developing as a talent. Now, if we go through and we look at that rookie season and really see how impressive it was overall, if we combine 2 different factors, we want to see our wide receivers averaging 8 targets a game, which Brandon Aiyuk did, and we want to see them have a 22% market share in their respective offense. Thank RotoViz for providing us with everything here, but you actually have a short list of wide receivers since 2010 that were able to do this their rookie seasons. You have Odell Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, Jalen Waddle. We talked about Waddle in another video. Kelvin Benjamin, yes, there's a bust on this list. There is a bust. Brandon Aiyuk, Sammy Watkins, Mike Williams, and Justin Blackmon. Of course, that's not saying Brandon Aiyuk is destined to be a Hall of Famer by any means, but it's showing that his rookie season truly was special. Now, let's go through and talk about the negatives with Brandon Aiyuk. The 49ers overall are going to want to run the ball over and over and over again. If we head over to RotoViz and we look at what the 49ers have done in neutral situations so far over the past 3 years, we see that this is a top 5 team with their run rate. That's with Jimmy Garoppolo as well, who we know Jimmy Garoppolo is not dynamic. He's not going to be Trey Lance. So it's very easy to see the 49ers this upcoming season, especially with the good defense, going out and leading the NFL in rushing attempts. Like, I want to say that you probably have Baltimore, New England, San Francisco. Those are the 3 teams that are going to be running it over and over and over again. And if we think about it, okay, well, are we excited about the third option in New England? No. Nobody's drafting Kendrick Bourne. Are we excited about the third option in Baltimore? Well, yeah, on Underdog, I'm drafting Devin Duvernay a lot in the 18th round. He's going in the 18th, so you are paying a premium on Brandon Aiyuk as the third option in a run-heavy offense. And I love Trey Lance. Y'all know I have been the biggest Trey Lance fanboy you can find. I think that he is going to be an elite quarterback in fantasy because the situation he's stepping into is wide receiver 3 is Brandon Aiyuk and his rushing upside. But I've never been one to come out here and say Trey Lance is going to be a good NFL quarterback. From the sneak peek we got last season, I think you have to be discouraged about the overall passing efficiency with Lance. So Aiyuk, he can bounce back. He can return value on where he's being drafted as the wide receiver 39. I just think what would have to happen is you would have to see either Deebo Samuel or George Kittle miss time this season. Now, they don't have to miss the entire year. If they miss a 6-game stretch, hell, I think Brandon Aiyuk is going to be a profitable bet at wide receiver 39. It's just very difficult to go through and take him there right away. Now, let's move over to a wide receiver that I actually have been drafting a lot. I've drafted him a lot more than what we have seen with Aiyuk. Let's go over to AJ Brown, who definitely disappointed this past year. He was being drafted at the very beginning of the second round. Some people were making the argument before Julio Jones came over that AJ Brown should have been a first-round pick last season. And now AJ Brown over there on Underdog is going right at the beginning of the third. He has an ADP of 25, wide receiver 10, right after Tyreek Hill, right before T. Higgins. And you're really seeing this ADP here because if you're drafting on Underdog and you take Jonathan Taylor and the first, it's very hard to pull the trigger on those running backs at the 2-3 turn. So AJ Brown almost by default is sliding up here. Now, if we're looking at AJ Brown, his second year in the league, he was a top 10 wide receiver. The second year in the league, he was the wide receiver 7 on a per game basis. And in 2021, yeah, he had a fall off. He actually fell down to being the wide receiver 26, but his efficiency went nowhere. The underlying metrics for AJ Brown stayed the exact same. This is a wide receiver that in 2020, when he posted a top 10 season, he averaged 94 air yards a game. This past year, he averaged 93 air yards a game. If we look at the first 3 years of his NFL career, now, I wish it would be easier for me to go through and track this on RotoViz. It's difficult, but I want to say that no wide receiver probably has ever, and I think I can confidently say this as well. I think no wide receiver in NFL history has probably ever posted at least 2.7 yards per route run through the first 3 years of their NFL career. 2.8 in 2019, 2.7 in 2020, and that remained constant at 2.7 in 2021. And his target share went up in Tennessee. These are all the predictive metrics going forward. Air yards is very predictive. Yards per route run is very predictive. Target share is very predictive. And he was just as good, if not better, in every one of those categories in 2021 than he was in 2020. But he fell down to being a high-end wide receiver 3 in 2021. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, why did this happen? It's easy. The answer's staring at you right in the face. In 2020, he posted a touchdown rate above 10%. He was scoring about 4 touchdowns every 5 games off of only 7.5 targets a game. That's not sustainable. You should have known that was coming back down to earth. This past season, it dipped down probably a little bit too far. It dipped down to 4.76%. His 3-year average has been hovering around 8.2. So I think we can safely say that AJ Brown, if you're projecting him out this upcoming season, his touchdown rate should be closer to about 7 to 8% based on the talent that he is. If we're looking at his yards per route run, I want to say that AJ Brown, I almost want to speak it as it's a fact that he's one of the most talented, if not the most talented wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, if we go through and if we look at the last 3 seasons and the only players to average over 2.7 yards per route run over the past 3 seasons at the wide receiver position, Davante Adams, Justin Jefferson, and AJ Brown. Davante Adams, 29 years old. Now, Justin Jefferson, obviously a better wide receiver than AJ Brown, but you're getting Justin Jefferson at pick 3, at pick 4. You're getting AJ Brown at the beginning of the 3rd. So clearly you prefer Jefferson. But this kind of just gives you context of how damn good AJ Brown truly is. And we have seen before that this Tennessee Titans offense is legitimately nothing without him. If we look at games that AJ Brown has missed through the past 3 seasons, you have 6 games that Ryan Tannehill played without AJ Brown. And in those 6 games, Ryan Tannehill averaged, it's going to be brutal, 0.83 touchdowns per game compared to 1.85 with AJ Brown. He actually had more pass attempts because the team was worse overall and had to throw the ball more. He had an abysmal 6.31 passing yards per attempt without AJ Brown compared to 8.12 passing yards per attempt with AJ Brown during this span. So we have seen AJ Brown's ability to elevate bad quarterback play. And that's the thesis here going over to Philadelphia. You're essentially betting AJ Brown is one of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL. He's going to get to Philadelphia and he's going to be able to elevate Jalen Hurts and this piss poor passing offense in Philadelphia. And I think it's almost easy to see that happening. Now, I don't want to act like everything's great with AJ Brown because we can say, well, he was a large reason in why the Tennessee Titans and Ryan Tannehill have found success over the past 3 seasons. We can at the same time say the Philadelphia Eagles may be a worse situation overall than what you had in Tennessee. It's gross to admit that. He's leaving a bad situation to possibly one that's slightly worse. And if we go over and we look at that same RotoViz statistic that we pulled up the San Francisco 49ers rush rate with, let's go neutral situation. That means the game's within 7 points and you take out the last 2 minutes of the first half. The Philadelphia Eagles last season only were behind the New England Patriots in their rush rate. This is a team that wants to run the ball, and we have to look at the dominance by AJ Brown and admit that he had no target competition at all in Tennessee. The second leading receiver in targets last year was Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Not great. Now he's going over to an offense that has Devontae Smith, not only Smith, Dallas Goedert. If Dallas Goedert was in Tennessee last season, he would have been significantly, by far and away, the second best receiver in Tennessee. So I am fine drafting AJ Brown at the beginning of the 3rd round because I believe that he is an elite talent, but we have to be real with ourselves and admit that he is going to a very bad situation overall. Now, let's go over to our 3rd player here. Let's go over to DK Metcalf. We'll be very brief with Metcalf because we've talked about him a lot. If you pull up where he's going on Underdog Fantasy, you're getting him about in the middle of the 4th round. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 19. And it's a very similar situation between these 2 wide receivers. And it's funny because obviously DK Metcalf and AJ Brown will always be compared to each other. They both went to Ole Miss. They both came out in that 2019 draft class. They were both selected in the 2nd round. There are so many similarities between DK Metcalf and AJ Brown. And yet again, you are going to see this wide receiver potentially being a bounce back candidate, but in an atrocious situation. In 2020, DK Metcalf was a top 10 wide receiver on a points per game basis. DK Metcalf was close to the wide receiver 6. And if we look at how impressive that season was, he commanded volume. He had efficiency. Oh, dear God. If you look at the first 2 years of any wide receiver's career since the year 2000, and you filter out wide receivers that had 1,300 receiving yards and 10 yards per target in either their rookie or second year, these were the players: Josh Gordon, Torrey Holt, Victor Cruz, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, George Kittle, Rob Gronkowski, Odell Beckham Jr., and DK Metcalf. Like, DK Metcalf posted a fabulous second season. And he got better with the underlying metrics in year 3. This is a wide receiver that went from 23% of his team's target share in 2020 to 26% in 2021. His target share has steadily climbed every year he's been in the NFL, indicating that he is getting a larger portion of this offense than Tyler Lockett, than the third option. But there are some negatives to look at here with Metcalf. He's going from top 10 quarterback play in the NFL with Russell Wilson to now presumably bottom 10 quarterback play in the NFL with whoever you expect to start there. So that's going to be a major concern because he had his highest touchdown rate of his entire NFL career in 2021. That number should come back down to earth, especially if you were getting bad quarterback play coming in. And on top of this, there's the concern that DK Metcalf throughout his entire career has only had to compete with Tyler Lockett. Now, I know it sounds ridiculous, but Noah Fant coming in may hurt, because if Noah Fant can command, say 14, 15, 16% of this team's target, that is going to eat into Metcalf. That's going to eat into Tyler Lockett just slightly. So the worry is that this offense is so bad that despite DK Metcalf continuously improving as a wide receiver, despite everybody being in agreement that he is a top talent in the NFL, there's just not enough production to go around for him to have a high ceiling. So if we're looking at DK Metcalf being drafted as the wide receiver 19 right before Amari Cooper and Terry McLaurin, if you're drafting Metcalf here, you're essentially betting they trade for Baker, they trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. They get someone else in here, because if Jimmy Garoppolo goes over to Seattle, I don't know if they would trade him in division, but if they somehow did, all of a sudden, I think you're looking at DK Metcalf as a massive value at wide receiver 19. However, if his quarterback's Drew Lock, dear God, look at what Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton have been over the past few seasons. Now, let's go over to the main guy everybody's here for. Let's go over to Allen Robinson. And with Allen Robinson, I do not want to understate how bad he was this past season. He was the wide receiver 79. He had 17% of the Chicago Bears targets on a per game basis. He scored 1 touchdown. And the biggest red flag of them all, 1.2 yards per route run. Now, I cannot stress enough how bad that is. And you go through and you look at Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney was decent with his yards per route run. I mean, Darnell Mooney was hovering, I believe, about 1.8. Let me look this up. But yes, it was 1.8. Now, let's talk about how important this statistic is. I went ahead and tracked the top 24 wide receivers on a per game basis in 2021 and in 2020. And what I wanted to do to prove the importance of yards per route run is I then tracked their previous year's yards per route run. So if you finished as a top 24 wide receiver in 2020, what was your yards per route run in 2019? And could we have predicted your success? And the reason I'm drawing the cutoff as wide receiver 24 is that's where Allen Robinson's being drafted on Underdog Fantasy right now. He's being drafted as wide receiver 24, directly ahead of David Montgomery, Lamar Jackson, and Chris Godwin. Now, the findings were pretty concrete with this yards per route run data, in that the average yards per route run before a top 24 finish was about 2. And the lowest that you had among the 48 finishes was 1.4 from Brandon Cooks. He finished as a top 24 wide receiver in 2020, and that 1.4 yards per route run was that 2019 season. That was abysmal, and he had to switch teams to the Houston Texans. Allen Robinson was at 1.2. Over the past 2 years, we never saw a wide receiver go from 1.2 or less yards per route run and then finish as a top 24 option. Now, I would be willing to completely ignore this and say, oh my God, it was Justin Fields. It was Matt Nagy. Come on, Mason. Are we serious? We're looking at this season. Darnell Mooney posted a yards per route run 1.8. Darnell Mooney was more efficient. Darnell Mooney commanded more volume. Darnell Mooney was a wide receiver 3 in fantasy. I don't think Darnell Mooney is the top 10 receiver in the NFL. So if he was overcome this situation, I'm not that confident saying Allen Robinson is all of a sudden going to be elite. Now, what I do have to admit, Allen Robinson, throughout his entire career since 2014, has played with some of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. He played 46 games with Blake Bortles, 36 games with Trubisky, 8 games with Nick Foles, 10 games Justin Fields, played with Andy Dalton, Chase Daniel, Chad Henne. Like, dear God, Matthew Stafford will be by far and away the best quarterback he's ever played with. And on top of this, he's getting Sean McVay, who was able to find a successful role for Odell Beckham Jr., who was atrocious in Cleveland as well. Now, adding in the contract they gave Allen Robinson, this is what makes me scared. They gave Allen Robinson $30 million guaranteed. If you compare that to someone like Juju Smith-Schuster this past season, Juju got paid $2.5 million guaranteed from the Chiefs. So the Rams, they're going out on a limb and they're saying, oh yeah, we're willing to bet on the Allen Robinson breakout. We are willing to go through and say it was all Justin Fields. It was all Matt Nagy. Allen Robinson is an elite level receiver. I don't want to act like I'm smarter than Sean McVay. Obviously, Sean McVay and everybody associated with the Los Angeles Rams organization, significantly smarter than I am. But based on this data, based on Cooper Kupp taking over 25% of this team's target share, I'm not drafting Allen Robinson at the end of the 4th, the beginning of the 5th round. I am taking David Montgomery. I'm taking Lamar Jackson. I'm taking Chris Godwin over him. I mean, he's going one spot behind George Kittle. I'm taking Kittle easily. But let me know what y'all are doing this upcoming season with these players. I think really the only guy I would be willing to say I'm betting on the bounce back would be if you can get DK Metcalf as a low-end wide receiver 2 in your fantasy draft. If you can get AJ Brown as a player in the beginning of the 3rd, the middle of the 3rd round, I'm willing to bet on those options. Or Brandon Aiyuk, if you want to stack him with Trey Lance. Really the one guy I'm not betting on is Allen Robinson, but I got burnt with Allen Robinson. Maybe I'm biased. I had him ranked over Chris Godwin last year and he made me look like an idiot. Thank you for being a part of the flock. Thank you for supporting the channel. I hope you have a great day. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you got something from it and hope to see you in a live stream sometime soon.